3 is about phylum Porifera, and the animals that we find in Porifera are called sponges. By the time this video is over, you'll be able to describe the body plan of sponges, and then talk about how they meet the requirements for the life functions that we discussed in the past 2 videos. How do they feed, how do they respire, etc. General information about poriferans. Like I mentioned before, they're commonly known as sponges. These are the simplest animals that we know of. There's about 10,000 species, and all of the species of sponges that we know about live in the water. They're aquatic. What's really cool about them is that if you break a piece off, it can regenerate, it can grow back. So scientists are studying the regenerative properties in poriferans and other animals that have this quality to see if we can somehow apply that to humans. In terms of body plan, they are asymmetrical. You can cut a sponge in half any direction and it will not be the same on the left and the right. Sponges are the only animals that lack tissues. In video 1 we talked about the ectoderm, mesoderm, and the endoderm, and how all animals as an embryo start as those tissues and everything from their body develops from those tissues. Well, sponges don't have them, so they're an exception to the rule. Body features. A sponge's body has 2 layers of cells. And so you would have, if you look in the picture, kind of like an outer layer and an inner layer. In between the 2 layers is a jelly-like substance called a mesohyl. The body wall forms a cylinder that at the bottom, like you can see in the picture here, is closed, and at the top it's open. That opening is called an osculum. There are pores along the sponge's body, and those are called ostia. So make sure that you learn these vocab words because I'm pretty sure that they're new to you. Mesohyl is the jelly-like substance between the 2 cell layers. Osculum is the opening at the top. Ostia are little openings or pores throughout the body of the sponge. Sponges breathe. They're animals, but they don't have lungs or gills. All that they do is they breathe through their cells, basically. Remember we talked about ways of respiring before? Basically oxygen can diffuse in, carbon dioxide can diffuse out of their cells. Nervous system, response. Sponges don't have a brain. What they do is they have just very, very simple nerve responses that allow them to do things like release toxins because they can't get up and swim away. So the most complicated they really get is a response to a predator in terms of releasing toxins. How they feed. They're filter feeders, so water gets sucked in and then they filter out what they want and then kick the rest out. The interior is lined with what are called choanocytes or collar cells, and that's what you see to the right here. These are 2 separate choanocytes. They have a little flagellum in them, so this is a special cell that the flagellum flaps and it brings water in the pores, the ostia. And then this allows the food to make it into the rest of the sponge, so then it can do with it what it needs to. Plankton and other organisms that they eat get trapped, and then so they get trapped in the cells here, the choanocytes. And then amoebocytes, if you look in this picture here where my mouse is, these are crawling cells that actually live inside the sponge. They're part of its body that take the food and nutrients wherever it needs to go inside the sponge. In blend space, I'm going to put a video next to this one of sponges feeding. You're going to see a scientist inject some fluorescent dye into the water, and then you'll see that how it gets drawn into the sponge and then goes out the pore, the osculum. It's really cool. So take a look at that video right now, pause me, or after you're done with this one. How sponges get rid of their wastes. Carbon dioxide basically diffuses out of their cells into the water that is surrounding the sponge, and that happens with other wastes as well. The water then carries the wastes away, so they're not by the sponge anymore and doesn't poison it. Movement. 2 words that are going to keep coming up, and we've had them already. Motile or motile and sessile or sessile. Larvae are motile, meaning they are able to move, and I remember that because it M for moving. Adult sponges, so once that little larva sets down wherever it's going to grow up, it becomes sessile. It's stuck. It cannot move. In terms of body support, sponges are very simple. Some of them have protein that is called spongin That's what you see at the bottom here. And the spongin fibers make up this really tough, simple skeleton. You also see it in this top picture, which kind of looks like a pineapple, but it's a sponge, I promise. Others have spicules, which are these spiny projections that, if you think about a pineapple kind of has those. And they're made out of CaCO3, which is calcium carbonate, or SiO2, which is silicon dioxide. And it's just another form of protection for the sponge. In terms of reproduction, sponges can reproduce asexually, so you have a little piece that buds and breaks off and then can become its own sponge. And some also form gemmules. Remember when we talked about bacteria? Some bacteria form endospores to protect their DNA, and the cell can die, but the DNA is protected and that can become a new bacteria. Sponges are kind of like that. They form these gemmules in some freshwater sponges, and then that provides protection, so when conditions improve, the sponge can grow back or form a new sponge. Sponges can also reproduce sexually, and because they can't get up and move anywhere, all they do is release sperm into the water, and then that enters a pore of another sponge, and then that can get fertilized and become a new sponge. And amoebocytes, which carry around food inside the sponge, can also carry around the sperm to an egg, which fertilizes the egg, that develops into the larva. The larva then becomes a new sponge. And remember that once the larva settles down, it attaches, it becomes sessile. The cells can reorganize and form an adult sponge. Now that you've seen this video, you should be able to describe the body plan, explain how sponges reproduce, how they feed, how they breathe, all that stuff that we've been looking at in this video. Next, what you need to do is take a quiz. After you take the quiz, pick up this chart. It's copied on colored paper. You do not want to lose this thing. I'm calling it your cheat chart, and it is very important that you keep track of this. You need to fill out the column for porifera. So what are the animals that belong in porifera? What pattern do all poriferans show of symmetry? How do they respire? How do they respond, etc.? We're going to fill this in for every single group that we talk about. And it's, like I said, do not lose this. It's very, very important. You do not need to get it checked off with me this time, but after you watch the next video, Cnidaria, I'll check off 2 columns at once. So fill in the chart and then go on to the next video about Cnidarians.